Hello, everyone. This is Howard Fox, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series, the podcast that celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Patricia Newman is our guest today. Patricia is a children's book author and an environmentalist. She writes books that encourage children to consider their relationship with nature and how it impacts the world around them. Patricia, welcome to the Outdoor Adventure Series.
Oh, thank you so much, Howard. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. I feel like you and I have been going back and forth for many months now. We are both affiliated with Podmatch, and it's a great place to find guests. And you and I connected, seems like so long ago, and it's like, finally, you're here. So I'm excited.
I'm finally here. We did it.
All right. And by the way, I can see that you have your natural background behind you of all your books, and especially the ones you've authored. And that's actually a pretty nice space. You got good lighting, and it looks good behind you. For our listeners, I have the ocean behind me down in the Gulf Shores, Orange Beach area. But in any case, you're here, and I would love if you could, Patricia. We don't have to go into novel level or memoir level detail, but if you could, would you share a little bit about your background and expertise?
Sure. Where to start with that backstory? When I was a kid, I wrote for school. I wrote reports and I wrote my assignments, but I never wrote creatively. In fact, it sort of froze me up because when I was in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, I was bullied, and it just completely shut me down. But by the time I got to high school and got to college, whenever I visit schools, I always tell kids, there is another end of bullying. You do come out of it. You do grow up. You do develop skills that help you kind of put it behind you. But I realize that what I'm interested in now is, of course, the environment, but it's usually things, people, animals that don't have a voice. And I think that's because for a few years there, I felt like I didn't have a voice. And it finally all connected when I became a mom. I took my kids to the library. We checked out the maximum number of books always. And I think it was something like 60 books. And we carted these things home, sat on the couch and started reading. And I had one child under one arm and one child under the other arm, and the kids were turning pages. And my mother-in-law happened to be visiting that time, and she was watching us. And after we read 6, 7, 8 books, she looked at me and said, "Patty, you could do this." And it had never occurred to me that I could write books before. And it had never occurred to me that I could write children's books, but I absolutely adored them. I loved the interplay of art and words and images and words. And I started trying. I went through that apprenticeship that all writers go through. And when my mother-in-law was alive, I always used to joke with her that I was the only daughter-in-law ever that listened to her mother-in-law. She gave me some very good advice, and I've just stuck with it. She was right. I can do this.
Fantastic. Well, there's testament to those words because you are an accomplished writer. Just looking at all of the books and the subject matter for which you are known for. I am curious. First off, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Okay.
And when I was about 6 or 7, we moved to South Burlington, Vermont, and I was raised in Vermont.
Oh, wow. That's a big change.
That was a big change. And then when I got married, I moved to San Diego, California. So
wow.
That was a big change too.
At any time in that part of the journeys, had you had an interest in any of the outdoor spaces besides, as you quote unquote, I was a nerd, and I get that. And it's unfortunately being labeled as a nerd that has some negative aspects to it, which can be the bullying. And I love the fact, because I also hear libraries, the reading, the journaling, it's an outlet for creativity. And
Right.
I think
Well,
it's very
even as a
important.
kid, Howard, I embraced my nerdiness. I
Yeah.
knew I was a nerd from the very get-go, but
Okay.
I loved to learn. I loved new things. I particularly loved making connections, and I think that's why I write about connection now. But when I was a kid, did I ever think that I was going to be an environmentalist? No. Did I ever think I was going to write about the environment? No. But I was the kid who looked under rocks. I was
Hmm.
the kid who had a vegetable garden with my dad. I was the kid who planted flowers with my mom. We planted trees together. We went to the beach all the time and body surf. Those are the days before boogie boarding, but body surfing. And, when we built sand structures on the beach, we built marine animals,
Okay.
and not castles. So, outside has always been part of my makeup. When I had one of those moms that said, just go outside and play. And
Right.
that's outside is where I grew up.
Okay.
So it's part of me. When I write out about outside, it's personal because it's a place I love. It's a place that brings me back to my childhood and makes me feel, I guess, calm and relaxed, and I feel good when I'm outside.
Okay. When your mother-in-law observed you with your children with the books, and she says, "You've got this. You need." When did you, or how did you make the connection between the writing and the environmental aspects of the book? Was that your first book, or did that evolve as well?
That evolved as well too. As you've talked to a lot of authors before, and we don't always know at the outset what we're meant to write. Right? Right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's you have to sort of find your niche.
Hmm.
And when I first started, I was trying to write light, funny picture books for very little kids because I had
Hmm.
very little kids, and it's
Hmm.
very common for children's authors to start with picture books. Um, and then I received a comment from an editor. When I went to writers' conferences, editors and agents were always some of the speakers.
Hmm.
And you could pay a little extra and get a critique of whatever
Hmm.
you were working on, one manuscript.
Hmm.
The critique that came back at one of these conferences was from an editor. And she said, I suspect you're more of a realistic writer than a fantastical writer. And darned if
Okay.
she wasn't right. And I sort of veered off to informational fiction first, not nonfiction, but informational fiction. I live in Sacramento, California, and the the California State Railroad Museum is in Sacramento. And I had this idea for a book about the railroad slang that railroaders used to use in the age of steam. And I wrote that book called Jingle the Brass. That was my first book.
Hmm.
And while it was fiction, because I had fictional people in the book, all of the phrases and the slang words that they used were real. And
Hmm.
I had to do a lot of research for that book. And that was followed up by a book about fighter pilots and their slang. That was called Nugget on the Flight Deck.
Oh, wow.
So I was sort of making this move toward nonfiction and not really realizing at the time that that's what I was doing. But then one day, just starting my day off like usual, sitting at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper, I noticed an article about a group of scientists from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography out of San Diego
Mhm.
mounting an expedition 1,000 miles into the North Pacific Central Gyre. And I followed their blog. The whole thing just really interested me because they were studying plastic that it was accumulating there. And I
Mhm.
had no idea that plastic had been accumulating in our ocean, none whatsoever. And I followed their blog during their expedition. And when they returned, I knew exactly, there were 17 scientists that went on the expedition. And as I was reading the blog, I knew exactly which ones I wanted to contact because of the different aspects of the ocean that they studied. And that book became Plastic Ahoy, Investigating the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's now 10 years old. The science is still relevant. They were among the very first scientists ever to not just notice plastic, but actually study it. And it sort of broke ground for all the other books about plastic for kids that you're seeing on the market right now.
Mhm.
So
I,
that's when I made the switch right there. When I wrote that book, I thought, this is where I have to be.
it was your aha moment,
That
as
was
I
an
like to
aha
call them.
moment for me. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. Would it be a surprise to share with you that there are many organizations out there, whether it's the National Marine Sanctuaries or the Surfrider Foundation or organizations throughout the US and the globe for that matter, that are very passionate about the very topics you're passionate about?
I know them exactly. My daughter is the executive director of Oregon Shores
Oh, wow.
Conservation Coalition, and I know a lot of these organizations, and you're exactly right. They're very passionate about the exact same things, and we're all delivering pretty much the same message, but we're all delivering it to subsets of audiences.
Right.
I'm working with children and their gatekeepers, parents,
Mm.
librarians, grandparents, teachers, for the most part, and then museums and other organizations do a lot of community outreach.
Mhm.
So my hope is that we overlap,
Mhm.
that the Surfrider Foundation uses Plastic Ahoy in one of their lessons one day, or Algalita down in Southern California, which was founded by Charles Moore, the ship's captain who originally discovered plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah.
That they use some of my books in their lessons or in their resources for teachers.
Sure. I love that. And I love these kinds of connections because now you're bringing it home, because I have the pleasure, just as a result of being a member of the Outdoor Writers Association of America, the OWAA, of hearing of folks who are very much interested in these topics. I'm very, as I like to say, opportunistic. I reach out to anybody, say, "Hey, would you like to be on the podcast?" If it makes a connection for me.
Right.
And so I love the fact that you've made these connections. And I think the children's books are so powerful because they help bridge, which can be a huge gap between an awareness of what we have to do to fix an issue, fix a problem, or address it. We may never fix it, but we can address it. And also the importance of helping children at the very young age at least have it somehow wired that I am a steward here of the environment and I can play a role. And I love how that connection gets made. As you have been writing your books, I know there's this theme here is the ocean and its fascination with you. How has that evolved since you began with your first book 10 years ago, Plastics Ahoy? Because you've got Sea Otter Heroes, which, by the way, my roommate's boyfriend will absolutely love your book because he lives on a boat in a marina and he loves sea otters. And when I was in Alaska recently, I had to send him a picture of a sea otter. But you've got sea otters, the planet ocean, rivers, gifts. In your new book, which I do want to chat about, Giant Rays of Hope, what is it about the ocean that is so fascinating for you? That's a big question.
It's a big ocean.
Yes, it is.
I grew up not on the ocean because I grew up in Vermont, but when we vacationed, we went to family who lived near the ocean, and we spent a lot of time on the beach. I was my dad's crew when we were sailing on a lake, on Lake Champlain in Vermont. So water has always been a place where I am very happy.
Mm.
But as I started to learn more and more about the ocean, first of all, Plastic Ahoy was horrifying for me.
Mm.
And a lot of people read it and say, wow, what a depressing thought. But in every one of my books, what I'm trying to do is provide the hope. I'm trying
Okay.
to provide a civic role model, if you will, that shows children how this problem can be addressed, as you say. And if enough of us work together, we will start changing the minds of the politicians who make the policies. So there's always hope written into every single one of my books. It's not just gloom and doom. And we all know that environmental headlines are very gloomy,
Mhm.
but there is hope too. And it's these people that are doing this work, the scientists in Plastic Ahoy, the scientist in Sea Otter Heroes, who discovered that sea otters are saving an entire seagrass ecosystem, and nobody ever knew it before. So that sort of being the first to be able to report about such a thing for children is a huge hook for me. I get very excited when I find something like that. Working on Planet Ocean with Annie Crawley, again, we worked on Plastic Ahoy together, but working on Planet Ocean with Annie Crawley, we got the chance to speak to Inupiat people way up north in Alaska. We spoke to Indonesian people. We spoke in the Coral Triangle. We spoke to the Lummi Nation people in the Salish Sea. And we have so many voices in that book and so many people doing for the ocean. They're not just sitting aside going, woe is me. They're identifying a local problem and acting locally, and that sort of can spur all of us to do the same sort of thing. In A River's Gifts, the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe and the government and community members got together to remove 100-year-old dams that were killing the salmon fishery, essentially. And the ecosystem is restoring itself. So that's actually a happy conservation story.
Mhm.
How many times do you read about one of those, right? So it's this hope that drives me on. That's what I love about the ocean. I also get a real kick out of doing some demonstrations for kids, even adults. I did this same demonstration for librarians in Texas, where I have 3 jars of cabbage juice, which is a great pH indicator. And I squirt a lemon juice into one and it turns pink instantly, bright pink instantly. And I leave the middle one as a control. And the third one, we're adding carbon dioxide, which is essentially what's happening in ocean acidification. Carbon dioxide is falling from the atmosphere into the ocean, and a chemical change is happening, which makes the water more acidic. It's not as acidic as a lemon, but it's acidic enough that marine life living on the edge anyway is going to be affected by it. And the way we do that is we blow carbon dioxide through a straw into the water, and the kids watch the color change. It's not as drastic as the lemon, but they can, for once, ocean acidification, which is an invisible process, becomes visible. And it never fails to wow adults and children. If any of you out there want to try it, it's the lesson plan is on my Planet Ocean page of my website. So give it a try. It's a fabulous, fabulous demonstration.
I love that. And one, I will provide in our show notes many of the links and to these demonstrations and to what you've written and your web and social sites. The other thing I love in this conversation is the word hope. And also you use the word civic role model, which I had never heard that those 3 words put together before, but I love that. And the idea of hope, and I will often ask guests on the podcast, it's typically, well, it is on the Outdoor Adventure series, because I have a lot of folks who are very much into conservation, stewardship, the environment, and I also do it on the business side is, do you have hope? And I love the fact that your answer is yes, and it's showing up in many ways within the books that you have written. So I love that. And yeah, you can't sit on the couch and go, woe is me. You got to get out there and be the change, the instrument of change.
Right. Right. I usually tell kids in schools that all of these environmental problems are human caused,
Hmm.
but that means they also have a human solution as well.
Right.
So we just have to figure out what it is, and we have to work together and stop denying things like climate change and denying things like plastic pollution. One of the things that I find that is a real disconnect with people, and Howard, maybe you have discovered this too, is that most people think of plastic pollution as a marine debris problem, period. End of
Mhm.
sentence. And it is a marine debris problem, but that's not the whole story. Plastic pollution is also a climate change problem because of the manufacturing process that plastic goes through. And in fact, I read an alarming statistic the other day that the plastic industry, about 50% of which is single-use plastic, and that's what we're
Mhm.
really targeting here. We want to try to get rid of as much single-use plastic as we can.
Mhm.
But the plastic manufacturing industry spews about as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as the airline industry. And that to me was wow. I sat back in my chair and thought about that one for a second.
Yeah, I had never heard that statistic before. Living here in Las Vegas, I mean, we're in the middle of a very long drought, and there are policies in place whereas you cannot plant grass, which is going to be a hard to grow here anyways. And to keep it green, you got to water it, which we're in short supply. Many homeowners are replacing the grass with artificial turf, which is looks good, just as bad. And
Yeah, well, it doesn't let the ground underneath it breathe. And when you dispose of it, essentially it's plastic. So what do you do
yeah,
with it?
yeah. And the other thing about the plastic too is that yes, it's a water, it's an ocean issue, but it's also a human health issue because even the water we drink these days has microplastics in it.
Right.
And
I read a study that said 2 bottles of water, like I'm not trying to call out a brand here, but those crystal geyser bottles that you see with the white caps on them,
right,
2 bottles have something like 240,000 pieces of nanoplastics in them.
it's incredible. So speaking of hope, let's give this conversation a ray of hope. Your new
Okay.
book that you're working on. How'd you like that segue? Was that good?
That was excellent. That
That
was
was
very
good.
well done.
Eighth. So tell us about your new book that's going to be coming out.
It's called Giant Rays of Hope, Protecting Manta Rays to Safeguard the Sea. And the thing I love about it's about manta rays. So, I mean, how could you not love it, right?
Of course.
An ocean lover, manta rays are the one majestic, calming thing that most people watch on those videos on YouTube, right?
Mm.
But anyway, this book is about a woman in Peru. Her name is Kirsten Forsberg, who the book sort of follows her journey from being a kid to becoming who she is now, a world-renowned conservationist. And I like this project because it's something that any child reading this book could eventually do. And Kirsten started with sea turtles on the beach. She noticed
No.
that there were a number washing up on the Peruvian coastline and they were dead. So she started counting them, measuring them, and identifying their species. And that's about as far as her college project allowed her to go before the semester ended. But when she graduated, she wrote a grant. She's a young 20-something, and she's competing against other PhDs for grant money.
Mhm.
And she won. She sort of grew her turtle project into something that involved university students, elementary students, teachers, fishers, and helped them understand that their practices were injuring the turtles that swam off the coast of Peru. There's a lot more detail to that, but we're going to move on. She took that same model and applied it to manta rays. Manta rays sort of came into her focus by accident, purely by accident. A manta ray researcher by the name of Andrea Marshall contacted her and said, "I've lost a tag, and it looks like it's blinking on your coastline. Can you help me find it?" And they offered a reward, and the fisher who had the tag came forward. And that sort of made Kirsten think, wow, we don't ever talk about mantas in Peru. Were they part of our culture? Why have they dropped off? And she did a little research, and she found that to some of the ancient peoples, the mantas and other marine creatures were very important. So she wanted to reintroduce giant manta rays to the people of coastal Peru. She started in northern Peru, and she's kind of working her way down. But she introduced them as these majestic animals that you don't need to fear. She organized diving parties with them. They created manta murals around town. She worked with teachers to develop ocean education units that included manta rays. She worked with fishers to try to eliminate bycatch, where the mantas swam into a fisher's net and was killed, because mantas have to keep swimming. They're a little bit like sharks, many sharks in that way. But it's just this whole program of step by step, one small success after another. And sometimes there's failure, but she kind of picks herself up and moves on. And she works with, there are many, many kids throughout that book who are quoted throughout that book. And she just has such a powerful message and such a hopeful message that I really can't wait to start sharing it with kids.
Excellent. And when can our listeners expect this book to be released?
October 1st is the release date, 2024.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to time the release of this podcast in advance to get people very interested
Thank you.
in the book. What else are you working on now that is furthering you're definitely creating hope in the minds of children, but how else do you see this work that you're doing being able to change the conversation, create dialogue amongst people perhaps that don't believe in plastics, don't believe in climate change, are very happy with watering their grass in the middle of a drought? What do you do? What are you continuing to do with your work that kind of advances just fostering hope, but also creating the dialogue?
Well, Howard, you probably know this already. Anything to do with conservation is a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Right.
And it's just continuing to educate, repeating the message to whatever audience you can. I go to many educator conferences, whether they're conferences for reading teachers or English teachers or librarians, and I talk about the same message. I talk about using nonfiction to connect kids with the wider world, to help them understand their role in nature. I actually talk to adults about how to talk to children about nature. I think it surprises some adults that children are more aware about what's going on than we think they are.
Right.
And they want to help. It matters to them. A sixth grader that I knew read Plastic Ahoy, and by the time she got to, I guess it was junior year of high school, she decided that she wanted to go to UC Berkeley and study plastic pollution, the chemistry of plastic. And she wrote her essay about Plastic Ahoy and how that decided it for her. I talked to a third grader who, after reading Sea Otter Heroes, he started his own GoFundMe campaign to bring sea otters back to the Palos Verdes coast in California, where he lives. So kids are out there. Look, Greta Thunberg, kids are out there. They're doing things. They care. They know the kind of problems that they're going to be inheriting, and they want to get a head start on learning what they can and being exposed to what they can so they can do something about it in the future.
Excellent. And it dawns on me, we usually have a segment of our show called the aha moment. And you've literally just shared a couple of those aha moments is the true impact that kids can have and the variety of the organizations. I mean, you mentioned your daughter was executive director of Oregon Shore. I believe that's what it was. You've got Surfrider Foundation. You've got the National Marine Sanctuaries, and their educational programs all have programming around helping to educate young kids. And I think are malleable. I mean, they're malleable. I think that's the word, where they're just absorbing this information and then they go back home and they talk to their parents. And the next thing you know, the parents and their children who are, rather than worrying about the couch and TVs and video games, are out there in nature, whether it's on land or in the ocean, enjoying themselves, but helping to make a difference as well. So I love that. There's that connection there.
One of the most fun things I think you can do with your kids is, fun, I guess from a nerd standpoint. But one of the things you can do with your kids to really bring that awareness home is to audit your trash.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us recycle, right? We live in places where they have some sort of recycling program. And if you don't, then hopefully you're doing it on your own. But
Right.
Is there a way that you can eliminate or reduce what goes into that one trash container that goes to the landfill? Can you increase your composting in your backyard? Can you increase your green waste recycling? Can you refuse products that come in single-use packaging and try to buy something in a more recycle-friendly container like glass?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I always use this example. When we make ribs, we use barbecue sauce. And there are tons of choices of barbecue sauce on the shelf in the grocery aisle. I always try to buy one that's in a glass bottle.
Right.
Luckily, I like the taste, or maybe make your own barbecue sauce and don't use anything on a plastic bottle.
There you go.
Try to stop using shampoo and conditioner in a plastic bottle and go for some of those bars that are out there.
Or the bottles of water, the plastic bottles, and having a reusable container. I mean, when I go on my hiking, it's hardly ever a bottle of water. Every once in a while, I have to have it, but having a reusable filter container. When it dawned on me too, is I have a colleague that I went through coach training with, and she and her husband live up in the northeast in Canada. I forget exactly where, but they had posted on Facebook the other day, this was the only bag of trash they've put out maybe in 6 months.
Yeah, that's
which I thought
amazing,
that's
right?
pretty amazing. Yeah.
It really is. And if you have school-age children, pack a zero-waste lunch. Challenge your kids to find ways to pack a zero-waste lunch. The only thing you're throwing away is something that is organic, like an
Right.
orange peel or a banana peel. Or adults, this is a big one for adults. We all go to conferences, right? We
Mhm.
all get together with our professional organizations. If you are organizing a conference, try to organize a plastic-free conference. If you are planning or contracting with a venue, make sure they are plastic-free. If you are just attending the conference, make some noise if they are not plastic-free. So we can all make little changes to our behavior.
Very, very much so. Before we head out, and I think we've done a great job with the aha moment. Unless you have one more you'd like to share with us, this is guest choice right now. But any final aha moments?
I guess I do have one more because I work with kids. They're all sort of aha moments. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
But
okay.
I did a presentation this year to celebrate 10 years of Plastic Ahoy. And I have some librarian friends in Texas who helped me organize this presentation.
Mhm.
And I just took heart and was so thrilled by this. I had 1,700 students in that presentation, and they were all eager to learn how we could make changes and how plastic was affecting our oceans and affecting our health, affecting our environment, our air quality, everything. And when I see that sort of excitement, it just it's just validation, and it gives me hope, right?
Right.
It gives me hope to write about that next story of hope, like Giant Rays of Hope.
I love that. Thank you. Before we head out, any final insight that you would like to share with our listeners uh, because of your work and the journey you have been on?
Well, I think one thing I've learned writing nonfiction for kids and writing about what some consider a controversial topic. I personally don't consider it a controversial topic, but some do. Um, it's important, I think, not to lecture. It's important to find the place where that person is and talk from there. Use personal experiences. When I write my nonfiction, if you happen to be a writer out there, make your writing personal. Put some of yourself in there. But even if you're not a writer, put yourself in your argument. Don't just spew a whole bunch of facts. They're not going to change anybody's minds. So find what resonates with them. Find out where they're coming from, and help them make a change. Don't force them to make a change.
Very good. I appreciate you gifting us that insight to go. Now, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to visit?
Probably the best place to start is my website, patriciamnewman.com. But you can also find me on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So, and Howard will have the links in the show notes. So I look forward to saying hello to you.
Fantastic. Well, we most definitely will have those links in the show notes. Patricia, I am so glad that we finally were able to get together and have this conversation. It's been a long time coming. I know we're going to wait to publish this as we get closer to the release of Giant Rays of Hope. I know for certain my listening community are really going to enjoy this conversation and hopefully provide more insight and action on their part to get out there, and especially if they have kids, in addition to just being adults, to get out there and take action, because there are many ways to do that. And I love the fact that you shared about hope as well. So again, thank you for taking the time, and it was a pleasure to get to know you.
A pleasure to get to know you too, Howard, and thank you.
All right, listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a very quick close, and you and I can have a final chat.
Okay.
All right, folks, long overdue podcast. I'm so happy to finally get to meet and chat with Patricia Newman. She's a children's book author and environmentalist. And I was thinking as we were sharing this conversation today, we need to have some merch, or she needs to have some merch on our website that says Nerds Rule. I think that'd be a fantastic t-shirt. So you can go ahead and run with that idea, Patricia. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation, and we're going to provide backlinks to Patricia's website, patriciamnewman.com, as well as her social sites, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we'll have links back to her current books, especially the about the plastic ahoy and sea otter heroes. I know my roommate's boyfriend is going to love that one. Planet Ocean, River's Gifts, and of course, Giant Rays of Hope will be out in October. So we're looking forward to timing the release of this episode with that. As for us, you can find us on our website, outdooradventureseries.com. We are also on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. Just search for Outdoor Adventure Series. And of course, we are on all of the podcast platforms. You can just search for Outdoor Adventure Series. If you happen to be on our website, Apple or Spotify, please do leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. And also, please, wherever you're getting this episode from, share it with your friends and family. That'll help us grow this podcast. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we look forward to having you join us on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.